Howdy folks, and welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles. It's been a really quiet week. There hasn't been any drama on the internet that I've been aware of. Nobody's been kicked from any community contributor programs. Nobody's published YouTube videos saying things that games developers have taken exception to. It's a bit of a bummer because it doesn't leave me an awful lot to talk about in Mingles with Jingles. I've been relying on my regular dose of wargaming drama to spice up Mingles with Jingles, and, well, everybody's behaved themselves this week. Go on, somebody go and do a video demanding that somebody from Wargaming gets fired so I can talk about it next week. Actually, no, don't do that. I can see it now. Jingles put me up to it. It's not my fault. Jingles said I had to do it. No, really, don't do that. Don't do that. So, what's been going on? Well, there's yet another public test out for World of Warships, and I might have to get onto the test server actually and have a look, because there are two big changes coming in the next patch for World of Warships, one of which seems to be quite welcome, and the other one I'm not really sure about. The first change is the introduction of naval bases for clans. So you're going to be able to harvest oil, which is the resource that you need to develop your naval base, and construct various different types of buildings for your naval base. And, well, this is why I'm going to have to go onto the test server, because the details are a little sketchy. But presumably these buildings are going to grant you certain types of bonuses. So, for example, and I'm just pulling this out of my ass because I don't actually know, but it's the sort of thing that I would expect. For example, you may be able to build a shipyard, and as the shipyard develops, it will lower the cost of your post-battle repairs, for example. So, things like that. That's the sort of thing that we'd expect to see. Of course, I'm going to have to get onto the test server in order to find out exactly what we're talking about, but that's the kind of thing that you'd expect. Now, what I was expecting, which is apparently not going to be the case, is that the oil that you need to get in order to expand and build up your naval base, you're not actually going to have to take part in clan activities in order to get it. So it's not like Clan Wars, for example, in World of Tanks, where your clan has to actually control and defend territory in Clan Wars battles in order to earn gold. It's not like Strongholds, where you have to take part in Strongholds battles in order to expand your stronghold in World of Tanks. Just play the game, and every time you earn a container, when you hit those experience earned in a day breakpoints and you get a free container, you're also going to earn some oil. So potentially you could just start a one-person clan, assuming you don't have any mates or you just don't want to be in a clan, and just by playing the game and earning your free crates every day, you're also going to be able to accumulate enough oil to start developing and upgrading your one-person clan naval base. Of course, if you're in a clan with a lot of players, and a lot of players who are playing the game all the time, then you're going to earn a lot more oil and you'll be able to develop the naval base faster. But it does mean that even if you're not interested in joining a clan, you can form a clan by yourself and at a much slower pace, obviously, but you'll still be able to develop this naval base and get all of the bonuses associated with it. So I'm going to have to get myself onto the test server and see exactly what the story is there. Of course, the other big change coming in patch, I don't even know what the number of the patch is, but the current patch that's being tested on the World of Warships test server is to do with the concealment mechanics in smokescreens, and I'm not entirely sure about this. Well, I'm sure of what it is that they're changing, I'm just not entirely sure whether or not this is a good idea, because they're talking about changing your detectability when firing from within or behind a smokescreen. And this is a basic core gameplay mechanic for, well, not just any ship that has a smokescreen, because anybody can hide behind a smokescreen. And if you start messing around with this sort of thing, it can have fundamental changes to the way the game plays. So it's going to need some really, really careful testing. And this is why I'm not entirely sure whether or not this is going to be a fantastic idea. Let's say, for example, in fact, I'll read you from the World of Warships website. Here we go. Firing from smoke is one of the basic tactics of destroyers and light cruisers equipped with smoke generators and was not intended for heavy cruisers and battleships. Well, that'd be why heavy cruisers and battleships don't have smoke screens. Coordinated actions of a battleship or a heavy cruiser together with a destroyer could result in enormous damage to enemies without getting close to them. Yes, we call this teamwork. Yeah, you can see why I'm very, very dubious about them messing around with these sort of things, because teamwork wins battles, and I don't care whether you're playing World of Warships in a destroyer or a light cruiser with a smokescreen or not, or you're playing World of Tanks, whatever. The team that works best together in a team-based multiplayer game should be the team that wins, because that's the whole point. So I'm very, very dubious about any kind of change to a game where they start penalising people for working together. Surely destroyers, as a prime example, using their smokescreen unselfishly and instead using it for the benefit of ships on their team that can't generate their own smokescreen, and who at certain points in the battle are looking at certain death if they don't get concealed. And then some random teammate in a destroyer, recognising how serious the situation is, steps up, comes out of nowhere, lays that smokescreen, and saves the battleship, for example. And it's because of that that the game is won. How many times have we seen that in a World of Warships video that I've uploaded? Well, as it happens, not very bloody often at all. I mean, it's... people go crazy about it in the comments of a video where it happens, because it is so unusual for a destroyer or light cruiser with a smokescreen to use that smokescreen unselfishly on behalf of teammates who need it more than they do. So I'm doubtful whether or not this is as big a problem as wargaming seem to think it is. Certainly not in random battles. Absolutely not. I mean, it happens so infrequently that people lose their minds about it in the comments section of a video where you see it happening in a random battle. It's like in World of Tanks, where, I don't know, maybe you're in a tier 8 light tank and you've been caught and pinned down and you can't get out of the tiny scrap of cover that you're in, because of the number of tanks that are basically waiting for you to move, and then suddenly out of nowhere an E100 or a Mouse or an E75 appears, parks himself in front of you and starts taking the hits for you, and then pulls back so that you can use them as a meat shield in order to get out. I can count on the fingers of one head how many times I've seen somebody do that in World of Tanks. Well, I've seen it happen a couple of times, but literally like 2 or 3 times. It's such a rare occurrence. And it's equally forgot how to speak English there for a second. It's equally rare in World of Warships, in random battles at least. But then again, I don't really think that it's random battles that this change is aimed at. I think we're talking about ranked battles here. I think we're talking about competitive play, like the Kings of the Sea tournament is a prime example of the sort of thing that happens at the highest echelon of ranked battles. It's all about grabbing the control points early and then camping hard behind islands and smoke screens, sitting on their points advantage and just waiting for the enemy team, who are going to lose if they don't do something, just waiting for them to do something. And it's really it can be really boring to watch. Certainly in ranked battles, it's about as interesting as watching paint dry. When you're watching something like the Kings of the Sea tournament, not so much. But then again, you know, it's a different level of gameplay. But certainly in ranked battles at the higher echelons, that's basically what the games are like. Everybody rushes forward, they can test the caps. Nobody's willing to risk losing a ship over it. And once the initial flurry of exchanges has gone off, everybody just sits on the points that they have. The team that's behind, it's then up to them to try to do something to break the deadlock if they don't want to lose, and that's it. And it's really boring to watch. And so I think that this change is aimed more at ranked battles than anything else. Certainly not in random battles, because the number of instances where you see people in destroyers or light cruisers using their smokescreen unselfishly is so incredibly rare. I mean, you may as well be wishing for unicorns. So my big concern here, because I don't really play ranked battles, And there's no doubt in my mind that these changes are aimed at ranked battles, but what you change in ranked battles affects everything else as well, because you're using the same ships with the same mechanics in random battles. And I've been here before, and I suspect a lot of you have as well, and the example I'm thinking of is World of Warcraft. Now, wait, what? No, bear with me, I'll explain. It's going to make sense. I used to play World of Warcraft a lot. But only ever in PvE, player versus environment. I used to raid, I used to do dungeons and so on and so on and so on. And the competition amongst players to earn their raid spot, to ensure that their performance was good, so that they kept getting selected to go onto the raiding roster within your guild, was pretty intense. And I can remember time after time after time, every time there was a patch coming out for World of Warcraft, I would scroll down through the patch notes just to have a look at the player versus player section to see how I was going to get nerfed because of complaints people were making in PvP. So, you know, I'm running with a druid healer in my raids, and I'm looking at the PvP patch notes, and everybody's whining in player versus player arena and battlegrounds that it's impossible to kill a druid because their heals over time are just too strong. It doesn't matter if you stun them, they've still got these heals ticking over every second and they're impossible to kill. So the duration of all of these various different druid heals is getting nerfed, purely because people were whining about it like little bitches in player versus player, which I didn't give a shit about because I didn't do player versus player in World of Warcraft. But that meant that when I came to compete for my spot as a healing druid in a PvE raid, my heals were suddenly shit. And nobody wanted druid healers in their raid anymore. They wanted shamans and priests and what have you, and so on and so on. So I'm constantly having to scan the patch notes for a part of the game that I don't even have any interest in, because it's going to affect what I am interested in. So, and this is where I'm coming from, because these changes are basically there to spice up and make ranked battles more interesting and less boring at the higher levels of ranked battles, but they're going to have an effect on the part of the game that I do play, operations and random battles. And this is where games developers have to be careful. I mean, World of Warcraft eventually solved the problem by just completely separating player versus player and player versus environment gameplay. I won't bore you with the details, but you basically have a completely different talent tree where you get all your skills from for player versus player combat. So they can make changes to player versus player and it doesn't affect anything else, and that's fantastic. It only took them 12 years to figure this out, but you know, they eventually got there. So that was my concern with these changes to the smoke mechanics. Well, not so much the smoke mechanics, but the visibility of ships firing through smoke. Currently being tinkered around with on the test server in World of Warships. I have to admit, they don't seem that bad, and I think that Wargaming were very conscious of the fact that they didn't want this to be seen as yet another destroyer nerf, because destroyers basically get nerfed every patch in World of Warships in one way or another, whether directly or indirectly. Do you remember way back? There was, across the board, just about a global buff to everybody's rudder shift type. That's a destroyer nerf. What are you talking about? It's an everything buff. Well, here's the thing. If an aircraft carrier is a competent aircraft carrier is going to cross-drop an attack on you with 2 squadrons of torpedo bombers, you're going to get hit by at least one of those torpedoes, regardless of how quickly you can turn your rudder, because it's next to impossible to avoid a cross-drop. So a rudder shift time buff is only going to help you avoid torpedoes launched by destroyers, because destroyers can't cross-drop torpedoes on you. Thankfully, as far as this change is concerned, it's not really going to affect destroyers that much. At the moment, there's this thing in World of Warships called the range of assured detection. And that basically means, regardless of whether you're inside a smokescreen or on the other side of an island or what, if you get within that certain range, you're going to get detected. You'll be lit up on the map. And people will be able to target you. Although if you're on the other side of an island, they might not necessarily be able to shoot at you, but they'll know where you are. At the moment, for destroyers, that range is 2 kilometres. So regardless of whatever else is happening, if you get within 2 kilometres of a destroyer and they're hidden because they're on the other side of an island or they're inside a smokescreen, once you get within 2 kilometres, they suddenly become visible, regardless of anything else. Also, regardless of whether or not that destroyer is actually firing their guns at you out of the smokescreen. The new parameters, currently on the test server, are that range of assured detection. If the destroyer is firing its guns from inside a smokescreen, will go up to 2.5 kilometers, and that's really not that much of a change. I mean, if you're within 2.5 kilometers of a hidden destroyer anyway, you know, I think you deserve to detect them because you've got balls of steel for getting that close. It's slightly worse news, however, for cruisers and battleships. If you're in a cruiser firing from within concealment, and we're probably mostly talking about British light cruisers here, as well as the USS Flint, but this applies to any cruiser that's firing from within the cover of a smokescreen, whether they laid that smokescreen or not. You will automatically be detected if an enemy ship, not an aircraft, just a ship, gets within 5.9 kilometers of you. And God help you if you're in a battleship trying to take advantage of a smokescreen, because you will be spotted from 13.6 kilometers away if you're firing your guns from within that smokescreen, regardless of the fact that you're actually inside a smokescreen. I suppose from a realism point of view, that does actually kind of make some sense, because if a battleship's firing 14, 15, 16 or 18-inch guns, have you seen what happens to the air in front of those gun barrels when those guns go off? Yeah. You may be concealed until you fire those guns, but no smokescreen is going to survive a blast from the massed batteries of a mid-20th century battleship when it decides to unleash a broadside. So I can kind of see where they're coming from, even though, you know, these changes are definitely not being implemented due to realism factors. They're being implemented to stop people camping behind smokescreens for 15 minutes at a time inside ranked battles. I can't help but wonder, though, where does that leave radar cruisers like the Chapayev, for example, because they're very, very important ships to have around in high-end competitive play. I don't know how many of you have ever actually watched something like the Kings of the Sea tournament. I highly recommend it if you do, by the way, because it's absolutely fantastic stuff. But a large part of the strategies of both teams revolve around the use of concealment, primarily to screen your battleships so that they can get up and hold those all-important capture points, and counteracting that either through the use of somebody with balls of steel and getting close enough to use hydroacoustic search, or getting a radar cruiser within range. So it's going to be very interesting to see how teams adapt to this and what new kinds of strategies evolve to cope with it in the upper echelons of ranked battle and high-end competitive tournament play. It may even be possible that we're going to see the first team in the Kings of the Sea tournament, for example, that doesn't actually include any battleships. Instead, just lots and lots and lots of cruisers with radar and destroyers, as well as the obligatory aircraft carrier. Anyway, I guess we'll see. And that's enough of talking about World of Warships for one particular week. Who's going to Tiger Day this weekend? What are you talking about, Jingles? Tiger Day was like 2 months ago. What? Well, yes, it was. But Tiger Day's become so popular at the Tank Museum that they're holding it twice this year. 16th of September, this Saturday. If you're planning on going, it's advance ticket sales only. You won't be able to turn up on the day and just buy a ticket at the door. And also, if you don't have a ticket, you won't be able to get into the Tank Museum at all. It's basically closed this Saturday for everything except for Tiger Day. I'm planning on going. I will, of course, be taking the video camera and filming the day for the benefit of everybody who can't actually get down to the Tank Museum. And as always, of course, you know, if you do spot me wandering around the grounds of the Tank Museum, don't be shy. You know, come up, say hello, shake my hand, get your picture taken. There isn't going to be any Jingles meet and greet tent the way there was at Tank Fest, because, you know, it's all about the tanks, it's not about me. And I am actually there to get stuff filmed this time around. It's not like at Tank Fest, which takes place over multiple days, and I can afford to put an entire day aside basically just to sit in the tent and say hello to people. I do have to actually, you know, get some filming done because it's one day only. But, you know, if I'm not busy and I'm just walking from one spot to another and you come across me in the grounds of the Tank Museum, then by all means stop, say hello, have a quick chat. If I can just ask one thing though, if you do happen to see me in the cafeteria at lunchtime and I'm sitting there eating my lunch, let me eat my lunch. I mean, by all means wave, but just let me enjoy my food in peace. That's the one thing I ask. You catch me anywhere else in the Tank Museum, it's open season on Jingles, but just not at lunchtime. Time is limited. I don't have all day to eat some food and then get back out and set up ready for the next filming session. But other than that, if you do see me wandering around the grounds of the Tank Museum, it's open season on Jingles. Moving on swiftly, the one other thing that I did want to talk, well actually there's two other things I wanted to talk about in this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles, and the first is to do with something that I spoke about in last week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. I told a story at the end of last week's episode about Leading Seaman Gareth Petley, who was in the Royal Navy, one of 5 brothers, all from Southampton, who all joined the Navy at the outbreak of hostilities in World War II, and Leading Seaman Petley was stationed on board a merchant ship as a gunner for the ship's anti-aircraft gun. Well, it wasn't just an anti-aircraft gun, it was a 12-pounder deck gun, which Leading Seaman Petley very, very effectively used one day while off the coast of Ireland in the anti-aircraft role when his ship came under attack by 3 German aircraft. He shot 2 of them down and was awarded, I can't remember the name of the medal. Anyway, not important. What is important is that I have a friend who goes by the name of John Ash, and John is the assistant editor of the Britain at War magazine. You might remember me talking about the Britain at War magazine. They actually contacted me and gave away to you lot in an episode of Mingles with Jingles an exclusive free digital issue of Britain at War. Well, they're very interested in Leading Seaman Petley's story, and they have certain resources available to them at Britain at War magazine that aren't typically available to people like Leading Seaman Petley's family, his son and his grandson. Particularly, they may be able to get access to the German Luftwaffe records so they can find out a little bit more about that incident when Leading Seaman Petley successfully defended his ship from German aircraft. And so I've put them in touch with Leading Seaman Petley's family, and they're going to see what they can do to get some more information about them, and hopefully with the aim of writing an article in Britain at War magazine about Leading Seaman Petley's exploits. So that's fantastic news. Very, very happy to be able to help the family out in that way. Anyway, that's just about it for this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. There's just one thing left that I have to do before we can put this episode to bed, and that's story time with Uncle Jingles. Has anybody ever heard of David Vivian Currie? No? If you're not Canadian, there's a good chance you probably haven't heard of him. And you may not have heard of him even if you are Canadian. But you're going to know who he is by the end of this episode of Mingles with Jingles. In June of 1944, Major David Vivian Currie was in command of a squadron of Sherman tanks in the Canadian Armoured Corps' South Alberta Regiment. Now, the thing you have to bear in mind here is that despite having been at war for 3 years and been in training for 2 years, up until this point, Dave had never actually been in combat, and at this precise moment had only been in Normandy for 10 days. Now, just bear that in mind when you hear what happens next. You see, in late June 1944, the German 7th Army was in full-scale retreat, trying to get out of Normandy, and it was surrounded on 3 sides by British, American and Canadian forces, and its one escape route was through a little village called Saint-Lambert-Sédive, and this village was home to one of the only roads that was capable of handling the volume of traffic required to get 50,000 German troops out of Normandy, so that they wouldn't be captured in what became known as the Falaise Pocket. Capturing this village and cutting off the retreat of 50,000 German soldiers was a job given to Major Currie, with his 10 days of combat experience, 12 Sherman tanks, and 2 companies numbering about 200 men of the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders. So his orders were basically, off you go, there's a good chap, capture that village, hold it until reinforcements arrive, against 50,000 troops of the German 7th Army. Now, he didn't have access to any artillery, he couldn't call in any airstrikes, and he didn't even have any reconnaissance of the village, so he was completely unaware that it was actually held by a detachment of the 2nd SS Panzer Division, who outnumbered his troops by 3-1. But of course he didn't know any of this. And let's not forget, this is the 2nd SS Panzer Division, so as well as machine gun nests, minefields, and 88mm anti-tank guns, the village was also defended by a detachment of Tigers. Currie didn't know any of this, he just knew he'd been given the job of capturing and holding this village, and so that's exactly what he did. Unsurprisingly, the first attack across the Normandy fields against forces that outnumbered him 3-1 with anti-tank guns and Tigers was not a success, and it cost them 2 of their Sherman tanks. So as night was falling, Currie, having pulled his troops back, dismounted from his command tank and then walked across the fields in front of the German positions to get a better idea of exactly where, in particular, the mortars and anti-tank guns were firing from, and in the process rescued all of the wounded single-handedly from the 2 Sherman tanks that had been knocked out earlier in the day. Now, of course, he had a slightly better idea of the odds that he was up against, but he also had a slightly better idea of exactly where those anti-tank guns and mortars were firing from. And so, armed with this information, his 200 infantry and 10 tanks stormed the village once again, and this time succeeded in pushing the German defenders out, while in the process personally knocking out one of the 2nd SS Panzer Division's Tigers by putting a shot through the side of the turret at point-blank range and decapitating the tank commander. Despite all of the odds, remember they were outnumbered 3-1, they had succeeded in pushing the Germans out of the village. Of course, now the fun was just beginning, because now they had to hold on to it. For the next 36 hours, 200 Canadians with 10 Sherman tanks, with no air support and no artillery, stood firm against everything the German army could throw at them. At several points the fighting got so close that Currie was forced to pop the hatch on his Sherman, grab a Lee Enfield rifle, and defend his tank against German infantry 50 yards away from him. On another occasion, a German convoy that had taken a wrong turn and gone the wrong way accidentally drove into the village, and Major Currie jumped out of his tank with a pistol in his hand, shoved it in the face of the German truck driver in the lead truck of the column, and took the whole lot of them prisoner. When artillery support eventually became available, he was calling in artillery strikes 20 metres away from his own positions. As night was falling on the last day of the battle, it became apparent to Major Currie that the Germans were up to something. The 2nd SS Panzer Division was mustering for a final assault on the village. Realising that it probably wasn't a good idea to be attacked by 2,100 members of the 2nd SS Panzer Division along with their tanks, Major Currie did what any reasonable man would have done under the circumstances. He attacked them first. Seriously, we are not making this shit up. 200, well, technically by that time 240 Canadians, because in all the days of fighting, the only reinforcements that managed to make it through the lines were 40 Canadian infantry. And with however many Shermans were still operational at that point in the battle, he attacked 2,100 German troops while they were mustering up and getting into position, catching them so completely by surprise that he managed to take them all prisoner. I am not making this up. 200 or so Canadians with less than a dozen M4 Shermans took 2,100 German prisoners of the 2nd SS Panzer Division. The defence of Saint-Lambert was complete. In total, they had knocked out 7 German tanks, 12 88mm guns, 40 armoured cars, they'd killed 800 enemy soldiers, and they'd taken 2,100 prisoners. They drove back repeated counterattacks, they held the road, and they sealed off the only escape from the Falaise pocket for 50,000 troops of the German 7th Army. In December 1944, David Vivian Currie personally was awarded the Victoria Cross from King George VI. He was the only Canadian to receive the Victoria Cross for actions during the Normandy campaign, and to this day he's the only Canadian Armoured Corps soldier to ever receive the Victoria Cross. After World War II, he was appointed Sergeant at Arms for the Canadian House of Commons. What that means is he spent 17 years of his post-war career as the guy who was single-handedly in charge of keeping the entire government of Canada alive. I can't think of a better man for the job. And that's it for this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. I hope you've enjoyed it, and as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.